The exhibition really begins with feminism and the way that feminism opens art to the mess of daily life, the way that feminists understood physical difference as the basis of oppression and proposed modes of collective action. In a lot of ways, we haven't acknowledged the extent to which feminist artists of the 1960s and 70s were talking about illness and disability and issues of bodily nonconformity.
My name is Bryan Barcena, and I'm the West Coast editor of Artforum magazine, and we're here today at the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego in their galleries with Senior Curator Jill Dawsey, whose exhibition For Dear Life, Art, Medicine, and Disability is on view. Thank you, Jill, for being here with us today. We're incredibly thankful that you've allowed us into the galleries on the day the museum's closed, and we get to experience this exhibition.
Yes, thanks for having me. This is an exhibition that I co-organized with Isabel Casso, who is the former associate curator of MCASD. And this exhibition looks at issues of illness, of disability. It is our contribution to PST ART, Art and Science Collide. We knew that medicine was something we wanted to think about, how artists have engaged with medicine. And yet, as the exhibition came into focus, questions of disability seem to be at the heart of it.
So the exhibition is organized chronologically. As visitors walk through the gallery, we're kind of walking through the 20th century and early 21st century in terms of disability. I'm wondering how you made that decision and how the exhibition kind of narrativizes itself across the different rooms.
The starting point for this exhibition is the explosion of work confronting questions of illness and disability. And I think coming out of COVID, all of us are thinking more about these questions. There's so much work being made today that is looking critically at disability. And so we wanted to ask what the precedents were for this work and to think about whether it might be a through line that runs further back. The exhibition opens with Yvonne Rainer's Hand movie. Rainer made this film in her hospital bed. She wasn't able to dance, so she uses her hand as a stand-in for her ailing body. It's projected high on the wall at the start of the show, and it's a way that at the opening we're able to kind of play with height. We also, it's juxtaposed with Pope L's, one of his crawl pieces, when he's crawling the length of Broadway wearing a Superman costume. So we look at the work of feminist artists, and in the 70s, as feminism becomes increasingly intersectional, we look at artists, who are in dialogue with one another. For example, Sengen Ngugi and Beverly Buchanan and Howardena Pindell. And the show becomes topical as we kind of move through the decades, so that it is naturally thematic. There are kind of thematic groupings, even as it is in many ways the most kind of strictly chronological show that I've ever organized. When we reach the 80s, we talk about overlapping epidemics, and so that many artists are sharing space who we wouldn't necessarily think about being in dialogue with one another, but we wanted to highlight the epidemic of cancer, specifically breast cancer, as feminists kind of turned their attention to breast cancer advocacy, and the way in which, the work of feminist activists and civil rights activists were influential for artists who were confronting the HIV/AIDS crisis. And, there we look at artists who were involved in ACT UP. We also think about the 80s into the 90s, artists who were making work about substance use disorder. With respect to the war on drugs, we have Felix Gonzalez-Torres' Just Say No.
So many artists in the exhibition are really thinking about the body's relationship to medicine, or the individual's relationship to medicine, or the larger medical industrial complex, right? And one of the things that is revealing about disability and illness is not all these works are necessarily a critique of that, but rather an interesting kind of idea of symbiosis and the possibilities there, and how technology actually can be life-sustaining in some ways in these cases. Given that this exhibition is part of PST ART and Science Collide, can you talk about some of the ways you thought about the subtitle of this exhibition is, of course, medicine, but how to think about medicine and technology and science in relation to illness and disability.
Well, to start with the subtitle of our show, Art, Medicine, and Disability, I think that may strike many ears as maybe problematic in certain ways, because the disability studies field has tried to decouple and to disentangle disability from medicine. And yet, medicine is part of the story of most of the artists in the show. We see this also in the work of Guadalupe Maravilla, who has a piece in the show, I Want to Thank the Radiation Machine. And it's about the radiation therapy machine that both saved his life, even as he has to look to, he has looked to indigenous traditions that are part of his own heritage. And, he has, of course, famously become a gong master and performed sound baths. These were strategies for contending with the side effects of the Western medical treatments. And so it is bringing these two things together. And so we see that in many works throughout the show.
One of the things that I find so interesting about the exhibition is that it doesn't treat the work or the presentation of the work in the museum as a kind of pinnacle of the artist's ability or career, or that this moment represents an overcoming of disability. Rather, it treats disability and the works made through disability as an ongoing process. Can you talk about that kind of, for lack of a better word, tone in the exhibition, or the choices you made that reinforce that kind of reading of disability? We
have a very inclusive understanding of disability, and in this we're following scholars such as Alison Kafer, who in Feminist Queer Crypt talks about an affinity-based model of disability. And because that's what we find, I think, in the work of the artists themselves. And I think one thing that happens, especially with sort of later generation artists, is this real critique of individualism and this idea of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, right? So we wanted to emphasize support systems and friendships and networks and not present these kind of individual heroic biographies. So I hope that's something that comes across. But furthermore, I think of the work of Catherine Sherwood, who is an artist who has been based in the Bay Area for many years and who is a professor at Berkeley and actually started a program there called Art, Medicine, and Disability, which is the subtitle of our exhibition. Sherwood experienced a cerebral hemorrhage, when she was in her 40s, sort of mid-career, and had to, she'd been a figurative painter, and she had to relearn to paint. She relearned to paint with her non-dominant hand, and began to work on a much looser style, on a larger scale, and got a lot of attention at that time, in fact. And so what's implicit there is that that we can only celebrate these achievements that somehow in which we transcend our disabilities, in which the disabilities are overcome, and this is in the same spirit as we must find the cure. We must have this presentation of wholeness, and I think that's one thing that so many of the artists in this show want to critique and to challenge.
Thank you for being with us today, Jill. I wanted to say that the exhibition is open here in San Diego until February 2nd, and the catalog is also available if you'd like to learn more about the exhibition. Thank you.